don't know how much you can hear the garbage trucks Monday mornings, but today they seem particularly loud. And at some point I became very happy with the sound, thinking that how good it is to sit in the middle of this world, not to be apart from it. And somehow sitting here quietly at IMC with the garbage trucks around me felt a little bit symbolic of just sitting with the world as it is. And some of you maybe don't know this, but here in Redwood City there's a freeway, a highway called 101, that runs on the edge of, kind of on the edge of town, the edge of the city. And there's a parking lot next to the other side of the freeway that, just across the fence from it. And there's a little office complex there. And in that parking lot, just kind of on the edge of the fence, looking down on the freeway, is a very large Buddha. It's probably 10 feet tall Buddha. And it's looking down at the cars driving by this big major freeway in the peninsula here, with its hand up, kind of blessing everyone. And that's kind of peculiar, just that it's there. And what's more peculiar is it's sitting on a cinder block little one-room little building, and with a big opening on one side. And it's a storage shed, I guess, for big garbage bin. And so here the Buddha is sitting on top of the garbage bin in Redwood City, looking at the freeway and all the cars going by. And so there's a saying in Buddhism that about the lotus flowering out of muddy waters. In Redwood City, we have a Buddha emerging out of the garbage, kind of. So the title for this 5-part series this week is Mindfulness of Oneself. And I'm partly inspired to do this because it's very valuable to become really attentive and mindful of oneself, and to know how to do that in a way that is beneficial. But also that one of the important teachings in Buddhism is the idea of not self. And this often gets misunderstood. And so in the course of this week, I want to address this particular teaching. But I want to put the teaching in a context, in a bigger context, because I get the sense sometimes this not-self teaching is taught out of context, or out of its original context, or where the Buddha offered it. And sometimes I think it's given more prominence, important as it is, it's given much more prominence in modern Buddhist teachings than it is in the teachings of the Buddha, where it has a very particular meaning, very particular context for where it becomes alive and valuable and maybe even inspiring teaching. But so I want to kind of talk about the wider context of it all. And one of them is that the Buddha talked a lot about, used a lot of language about oneself. And the word atta is self, and they say it can be both a philosophical term or a metaphysical term for something like a soul, but it could also just be an ordinary a personal pronoun, kind of myself, to I, I'm sitting here. Someone might say the atta is sitting here, just as much as they would say the I'm sitting here. But we get a lot of emphasis in the early teachings on what we would in English would call the self, on paying attention to oneself. And if we use the expression oneself, maybe it a little bit frees us from quickly getting mixed up with this teaching of not self, and then feeling that they're opposed to each other. There was a story of a group of aristocrats in the time of the Buddha who went to a park to enjoy the afternoon or the day, and they had a picnic, and There were all these couples, I guess married couples, but there was one aristocrat who came with a courtesan as his partner to the picnic. They all had this wonderful picnic, and then they all took naps. And while everyone else was sleeping, the courtesan went around and stole all the jewelry that everyone was wearing and disappeared. When they woke up, they noticed that they had been, that they had, what had happened, and that the courtesan was gone. So they went looking for her. And elsewhere in the park was the Buddha who was meditating. And they came to the Buddha and they said to him, have you seen a courtesan? And the Buddha said, what would you rather find, a courtesan or yourself? And so that got their attention. And so instead of looking for the courtesan and their jewelry, they sat down to sit with this spiritual teacher to find out, what is he teaching? What does it mean to find yourself? And so, but this contrast between jewelry and courtesans and finding what's been stolen and finding yourself is, kind of a dramatic contrast. That maybe the greatest treasure, the greatest jewelry we have is found within. And maybe that has the most value. And to spend time chasing after physical jewelry when we can discover the jewels within is a great, it's kind of maybe unfortunate, at least from the point of view of what's the treasures we can find inside ourselves. And the Buddha, here these people were just kind of being introduced to Buddhism with that teaching. When people follow the whole path of Buddhism to the end, they sometimes are called great selves, maha-attas, or naga-atta, selves that are like great serpents, great powerful beings. And so there's not a shyness in the early tradition to use the word atta as a strong word in reference to people, and also there's not a shyness to talk about an individual from terms of being kind of a strong, powerful person. Before the Buddha was enlightened, someone came to see him, and he was already a mendicant. Practicing, and I guess he was practicing in the woods, and someone came to him and said, it's pretty scary to go meditating alone deep in the woods. And the Buddha said, yeah, I realized that, and when I was thinking about going off to practice, I thought about the fear, and I realized that if a person doesn't have concentration, it's easy to be afraid in the woods, but I have concentration. If a person does unethical conduct in body, speech, and mind, it's easy then to go into the woods and be afraid. But I don't have unethical conduct in body, speech, and mind. If a person has covetousness and greed, it's easy to be afraid in the woods. But I don't have that. If a person has hostility and hatred, it's easy to be afraid deep in the woods. But I don't have that. And he went through all this list. He's checking himself out. He's getting to know himself, or he knows himself really well. And he knows that if he goes into the woods, those things are not going to be there to trip him up and make it difficult or frightening to be in the woods. So here's a person who really knows himself in the situation where it's important to do so. Because if you go into the wilderness alone, in a sense, you only have yourself to survive, to find your way, to take care of yourself. And you can't call first responders, you can't call, someone to help you if something happens. You have to really use your own wits and your own abilities to be able to manage, including managing not getting frozen or lost in fear. There's lots of stories of monks, even in modern Thailand, relatively modern Thailand, maybe not in the last decades, who went to practice in the woods and had experiences with wild animals, with tigers and different animals, that they had to deal with their fear. So so there are times, there are places we go where clearly we're responsible for ourselves. Clearly it's about us, me, myself, and mine, to really find my way with that. And the person needs to have skills, needs to know themselves well to find their way with that. And be responsible for themselves. No two ways about it, I think, for the most part. And there are personal places where people go in the modern world, and we're not in the wilderness, that we have to be responsible for ourselves, and we have to track ourselves and know ourselves and take responsibility for ourselves in a way that, that we don't expect anybody else to do it. I mean, I apologize maybe for this kind of maybe silly or inappropriate example, but no one else goes and pees for us. If we have to pee, we have to do it for ourselves. And so there is a place, a context for connecting and knowing oneself well. When we close our eyes in meditation, in a sense, we are going into an inner wilderness, an inner nature. And this, in meditation with our eyes closed, in spite of all the support we get from sitting with people and teachers and teachings, once the eyes are closed, symbolically, it's okay, it's just me and me, you and me. Here we are. And let's do the best of it. Let's find out. That's not the only thing we do in Buddhism. One of my favorite quotes of the Buddha is when he defined what it is to be a wise person. And he said a wise person is someone who is concerned with the welfare of oneself. And here the word is atta, the word for self. One is concerned for the welfare of others, and one is concerned for the welfare of both self and others, and one is concerned for the welfare of the whole world. So it's clearly the focus on self in meditation and Buddhist practice, which there's a lot of it there, is not meant to be selfish or self-absorbed. Also, there's a concern for others. Also, there's a concern for the relationship between others, the us, the self and others, and for the wider world. And in different contexts, the attention of care goes in different directions. But there is a context for doing it here, for us as an individual. Some people are uncomfortable with that, and they want it to be kind of some amorphous we, or amorphous where it's not separate from everybody else, and that's a fine thing to want in some ways, but to do that without becoming centered and stable here, become strong here, so that we have more to offer as we care for the others, as we care for the world around us. Some people are afraid of really standing up here and recognizing who they are and respecting themselves and really becoming embodied and full with who they are. In English we say be full of oneself, and that's kind of a form of conceit. And so we can be afraid of that conceit, to be so full in everything. And but there's a fascinating teachings in the Buddhism about this, where conceit is viewed as being three different types of conceit. There's a kind of conceit that many of us think of as conceit, thinking that one is better than others. There's a kind of, in Buddhism, there's also a conceit, a way of thinking about oneself, that solidifying around oneself, that thinks of oneself as less than others. And the third kind of conceit is the idea that we're equal to others. And that's particularly challenging for some people in a society where being equal is considered to be, the right way of being. So neither higher, lower, or equal is all three of those, because they're a form of conceit. So what's the alternative? It seems like there's nothing left. What's left is not to play the comparison self-game, not to judge ourselves either kind of way, because it involves an excessive preoccupation with self, and that's what makes it conceit. Excessive preoccupation with, I have to be a certain way. I have to be better than others, worse than others, or I have to be equal. We all have to be equal. And that also can lend itself to a lot of constriction and tightness around self as conceit, as a form of attachment. So clearly, conceit, attachment to identity, attachment to view, attachment to these things are clearly something that Buddhism wants to let go of, but not at the expense of becoming fully embodied people, fully present, strong, valued, respected. And there is a kind of way in which doing this practice, at least from the point of view of the Buddha, is to help us become powerful in a benign way, in a beneficial way, in a peaceful way, in a harmless way. But we're becoming abundant. And this is the words of the Buddha, language of the Buddha. We're becoming, there's an abundance rather than being wasted or deficient or not quite kind of living into our fullness. So, and that's one of the divisions the Buddha made. He divided people not by better or worse, inferior or superior, but he used the word, some people are deficient or deprived or wasted, and some people have an abundance. And meditation practice and the spiritual practice of Buddhism is to fill what is deprived, fill that what's wasted, and become abundant from the inside out. So, so that's beginning of this context for the Buddha's teaching of self. And thank you, and look forward to doing more of this through the week.